One of my favorite things about the Snoqualmie Valley is the amazing people that call this place home. And today I'm sharing with you one of those special people. Scott Rinckenberger is a local legend. He's a world-renowned photographer, an adventurer, an athlete, a dad, and he calls the Snoqualmie Valley home. Scott grew up locally and started skiing early on. And now he combines his pro skiing experience with his love of adventure photography, which has taken him all over the globe. He's worked with and been showcased by brands that you probably know. Brands like REI, Eddie Bauer, Apple, and more. I had a great conversation with Scott, and in this video, we talk about his love for adventuring and get an inside look into one of his most epic adventures, the 5 and 5. Take a look. So you started skiing at 6. What were those first kind of big memories of those moments?
So I definitely remember the first time I put on skis, and even before I had put on skis, and just put on ski boots in the lodge at Hyak up there. And like you said, I buckled into them and I was just instantly hooked. Just started bouncing around back and forth, you know, like I'm a pro ski racer. And so I just vividly remembered it, like even the act of
the clicks.
Clicking into the gear and buckling the boots was enough for me to totally fall in love with it for some reason. I would say I'm inherently a very competitive person, but I don't like to be a competitive person. And so being in a sort of an organized competitive environment puts me into that headspace and into that way of thinking and way of operating that sort of takes a lot of the joy out of the activity.
Yeah.
And takes some of the creativity out of it and latitude to sort of explore it. And so I found pretty early on that I was way more attracted to, you know, getting with photographers and filmers and stuff and going out and just trying to make great images and go on compelling adventures and sort of build a career that way as opposed to the competitive track, because it let me sort of be more at ease in my own body and mind, you know.
Getting into becoming a pro skier, were your parents, were they pulling you back a little bit and saying, no, you need to focus on school more, or, you know, only people that don't have real jobs do that stuff, or were they pushing you in and saying, go after it, do whatever you want to do kind of thing?
I had opportunities in skiing that were sort of time-limited opportunities, and so wanting to do the things I wanted to do meant that I kind of had to blow off some other things that were classically valued things, you know. And so from my parents' perspective, I think they didn't have quite as deep an understanding of sort of the, you know, adventure athlete path as I did. And at the same time, it was sort of it was a younger career path than it is now. Like if right now your kid says, I want to be a pro skier or mountain biker or rock climber or whatever, there's a really solid foundation and a lot of really well-established athletes you can point out and say, like, here's how you build that career. And, you know, 20, 25 years ago, to be like a professional free skier there was like 10 of them in the world, you know.
When you were younger and you're in peak physical condition now to do all the things you do, what was your, you know, growing up, were you like, oh, I'm going to be an athlete, like this is easy stuff for me, or was it work always from the get-go? I
wouldn't say I was a gifted athlete as a kid, but I was sort of the daredevil type, and I was a really small kid relative to all my peers throughout my entire school career. And so I kind of had this like chip on my shoulder and a lot of boldness to work with. And that, fortunately, my body caught up to where my head was at eventually, and I was able to sort of physically sustain the, like, you know, kind of mental approach I was taking, which was a full hammer down, you know, jump off anything in sight and show up all the bigger guys kind of thing.
So skiing early.
Yeah.
When did rock climbing come into it?
I sort of came to a point where I realized that I can touch a lot of the coolest, most rugged mountains in the Northwest and you know, far beyond if they're covered in snow. But when all the snow melts, I don't have the skills to sort of operate in the same tier of environments. And so that's when I sort of decided to dive into climbing with a lot more intensity, to trying to bring my level of climbing up closer to parity with my level of skiing.
It's no shock that when you're going out into these adventures, you got buddies with you and stuff. And talk about the trust that's needed with those guys and being in those elements consistently with them. And how has that been built, and what's that like for you guys now?
Yeah, no, that's everything. I pick my outdoor partners really carefully, and it's basically at this point, I'm either operating with professional skiers or climbers or bikers or whatever, or close friends of mine with whom I've had adventure partnerships for years, and who operate at a professional level and sort of have the breadth of experience and education and understanding to be able to deal with avalanche situations and have all the requisite tools and knowledge of how to do a rescue, and then have wilderness first aid experience and backcountry survival experience, and basically the places are really high consequence if anything goes wrong, and so you have to make sure that you're out there with people who first and foremost are making good decisions, and aren't adding risk, and then secondarily, if anything goes wrong, they're the type of people that you can count on and rely on to be able to deal with it as effectively as possible and make sure everybody comes out safe and healthy on the other end.
Tell us about the 5 and 5
Yeah.
and what that was all about.
Cool. Yeah, so the 5 and 5 was climbing, summiting, and skiing the 5 volcanoes of Washington State in 5 consecutive days. The difficulty in that lies in sort of being able to do a volcano every day, but also move between each of the volcanoes in the time you're not climbing, and make sure that you get a little bit of rest and you keep the calories coming in. And so it's a fun puzzle that has a lot of moving parts, and the climbing and skiing is only a component element in that. So Trevor and Peter and I had this window and we said, all right, we'll try it. But we got kind of a late-ish start, and the weather wasn't as good as it needed to be, and the snow was sticky and slow to deal with, and we got 3 days into it, and we were almost to the summit of Glacier Peak, which is this massive undertaking that, it's 35-mile round trip, and at that point, Trevor hadn't even remotely admitted that it wasn't going to work out until that moment. He's like, we're kind of done, aren't we? And I was like, yes, I've been saying for 3 days we're late, And so we went down and crashed in the van in the parking lot, and we woke up the next morning, and Trevor and I both said to each other, like, all right, when are we trying this again? And so then it was like, all right, if you actually really did this right, this can be done for sure. And then we also had, that gave us really good training for another effort. Like, we had just done 3 days of bashing our heads against volcanoes, day in and day out. And testing sleep deprivation and testing the nutrition and all this stuff. And that was my first try at it, but he had already tried a previous time. So he had a lot of sort of inherent knowledge. And basically we both freed up, if the weather works out, last week of June, we're going for it. This time we really put in the time to, where and when do we need to be, and in what order, and what are all the driving routes, and blah, 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 and really got the entire thing nailed down on spreadsheets, and had our meetings and got it wired, so that when we made a really good solid attempt, we had a way better plan, and B, a way better headspace and higher level of commitment. I think we brought really good energy into it, and we brought a lot of planning into it, and then also just a really positive outlook on it. That manifested itself in just sort of success following success following success, and a lot of fun being had the whole time, despite the sort of sleep deprivation and blah, blah, blah. And then it was sort of, we were just, ticking the boxes every day. We started with Rainier, and then went from Rainier to St. Helens, and St. Helens is kind of like a rest day, and then down to Mount Adams, and then up to Mount Baker, which is a 7 or 8 hour drive. and then to Glacier Peak as the final one, which just requires like a 13,000 foot day and 35 miles of travel.
Put us in the Scott's head, in the self-talk before that adventure starts.
Yeah.
Whether it's the day before or the night before.
Yeah.
What are you telling yourself and thinking about?
Yeah.
Are you visualizing? Where are we at?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great question specific to this 5-and-5 endeavor. I think I had the sort of the make or break moment, if it actually came the sort of night before we started, where I feel like I got my head right. Because, so we drove down the day before we were going to start, after we wrapped up work, and got down to Mount Rainier National Park, and then found ourselves a spot just outside of the park in the woods to camp in the truck. And tried to go to bed as early as possible because we were going to wake up at midnight to start trying to climb Rainier. As we're sort of drowsing away in the truck and trying to sleep, the place that my mind just automatically went was to start working through all the logistics that had to be considered, and I'm awake, I'm wide awake, and I'm just sort of thinking about all of the micro elements that could make or break the whole mission, and then started getting stressed because I'm not getting any sleep, and this is the last really solid block of sleep that we're gonna have before we start going into a mode of severe sleep deprivation. And so then you know how that sort of ends up generating its own sort of power, and it gets harder and harder to sleep the more you think about how you're not sleeping. I just decided to pick some words that I would just start repeating in my mind and kind of create a mantra that would hopefully get my rhythms down to a super low-key mode at that point, and then also hopefully be a tool I could continue to tap into. And so I just made a list of words that I wanted to sort of tap into and embody throughout the project. And so I was like, okay, gratitude. Like I want gratitude to be the #1 cause and ethos and ethic behind this whole thing. Like no matter how it turns out, what happens, where it breaks down or succeeds or whatever, grateful for being here. Grateful for having the opportunity, grateful for spending time in the mountains, spending time with a good friend. Like I'm just very grateful for this, opportunity to even live this life. And then presence, like I just want to be present in the moment and not think too much about what's coming up or what has passed already, and live that present state, and flow, to sort of try and flow through the landscape, and also to try and go with the flow and ride the waves as they come, and acceptance, to take any of the events as they come, process it, learn from it, accept it, move on, and then grace. And grace was like the capacity to both try and be efficient and graceful in how we were operating, but then also like be graceful with how I was talking and interacting with myself, and how I was interacting with Trevor, and just sort of try and act in a state of grace and live in a state of grace. And so then I just took those 5 words and just started repeating them in my mind until I finally fell asleep. And then every time, that I would start to, like, it was physically and mentally challenging to do this trip. Yeah. And so every time I would start to get into a place where like I was, leaning toward emphasizing the unpleasantries in my mind of what we were up to, then I would just like switch to that mantra and start repeating those words, incredibly powerful.
I had a great time sitting down with Scott and hearing about all his adventures, and I hope you enjoyed this first part of our conversation. In the next video, we dive deep into his photography, his creativity, and what inspires him to be the best. If you want to check out Scott's work, make sure to check out the links below in this video post. Stay tuned for the next video. Thanks for watching. I'm Brian Davis. I hope to see you in the valley.